Okay, so another thing I'd like to show you how to do is debug Quill code in a slightly different way. Right now, what I've shown you how to do is debug things from debug things by launching SBT from the command line in debug mode and then forcing a file to recompile. What I'm going to show you how to do is one other way of doing it. And this way is a little simpler in a fashion. So what you do is the first thing you have to do for this is you have to add this argument to your SBT settings in IntelliJ. And you're not going to be remote debugging, by the way, in this setting. What you're going to be doing is you're going to be setting up a way to launch a debug from IntelliJ directly. So the first thing we have to do is we have to add this D argument, debug macro. And this actually makes SBT pull in certain libraries that it wouldn't otherwise. So what you have to do when you do that is you have to close, or the SBT shell is closed already, so that's good. So you have to relaunch the SBT shell. Wait for it to do its thing. Still wait for it to do its thing. Then once we're done, reload SBT. Okay. And this will reload the SBT projects. The reason why you need to do that is this enable debug switch that I just told you to set is basically responsible for importing an additional library that will have a particular main class that you will then access. And if you actually search for enable debug, or debug, and what is this? Yes, debug macro, excuse me. If you look for debug macro, what this switch actually does in SBT is it makes SBT pull in some more of these dependencies, in particular this Scala reflect and Scala compiler, that are needed in order to launch the main function that will actually allow you to directly debug the SBT compilation from IntelliJ. And as I've mentioned before, right, because Quill compiles queries, in particular runs the parser to compile queries in the Scala compiler directly, you need to debug the Scala compiler in order to have a breakpoint debugging of the parser. So let's set that up. What you need to do is new application. Debug MySQL test. That's this file over here. Now, the guide here basically tells you what to do, what to enter into these settings. Main. Here's going to be our main class. Our VM options, we need this use JavaCP. And the program arguments, which is the most important thing. And we need to make sure that this is correct, which I think it is. yada, 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 and that. And by the way, this has to be the correct path. And this is going to be your operating system path, by the way. Right now, we are launching IntelliJ directly from inside the Ubuntu subsystem. This will be different if you are running, say, IntelliJ from Windows. In Windows, this will be your Windows path. But anyway, this is going to be this path right here, program arguments. And, oh yes, we need to change that. This is going to be git, and this is going to be Alexi, and that's going to be that. I believe that is the correct path to the test project. Working directory. I think working directory is correct. And now class path of module, Quill SQL. That's actually going to be Quill SQL JVM, excuse me. Yeah, I guess this is not correct. It's going to be SQL JVM. The other important thing to do is build no error check. What that does is, again, it enables you to, well, let's take a step back for a second. What is this thing? Scala.tools.nic.main, right? This is the Scala compiler. This is the main function of the Scala compiler. Now again, because the parser for Quill queries runs directly inside the Scala compiler, you need to debug the Scala compiler itself in order to be able to debug the parser, or at least how it parses a particular query. So, what you need to do is you need to rebuild, or force a file to rebuild or recompile inside the Scala compiler, and there, that's when it'll hit your breakpoint inside of parsing.scala. So what you need to do, by the way, if you happen to make a mistake somewhere, then the actual compilation, the actual Scala compiler will fail. But guess what? You still want that breakpoint. You still want that breakpoint to be hit. So, oh, and by the way, if it's a mistake inside of your code itself, right? If it's a mistake inside my SQL test, then you still want to be able to, have that compiler breakpoint. Now, if you make a mistake inside parsing.scala won't compile in the first place, so you won't be able to get in. But that's a different story. But if you make a mistake here in MySQL test.scala, you still want to be able to get into it. So that's why you want to do not build here, but you want to do build no error check. So what you want to do is you want to build this file, and even if compilation fails, you want to debug it. So let's click apply. Let's click OK. And let's change this thing. Let's set a breakpoint inside parsing. And now we don't click here. We make sure that this thing, debug MySQL test, is selected. In fact, let's change the name. Let's do compiler debug MySQL test. That kind of makes more sense. Let's debug it, and let's see what happens. Oh. No, I don't care to reload classes. Voila! There we go. Now we are again debugging the compiler, or debugging the Quill parser. So that is it. That is how we get IntelliJ running from inside the Ubuntu subsystem, and it seems to run decently. We don't see the problems that we saw in Windows earlier. Seems to work, so it definitely looks like it's worth a shot. The alternative, of course, is to try and run IntelliJ from Windows and then do everything from Windows. That's the alternative. And, we'll explore, some of these other things. Meanwhile, I guess we'll call it a day for that.